Hello, welcome to Planet America's Fireside Chat. I'm John Barron.
And I'm Chaz Leccidolo.
This week, as America reopens for business, the cost of closing too slowly in March has been revealed.
We're going to look at the hopes for a vaccine this year and the president's revelation he's putting his health where his mouth is, taking an unproven drug just in case it prevents coronavirus.
Plus, Joe Biden surging in national polls while one of President Trump's top officials comes under scrutiny for sacking a watchdog. But first, timing, so the proverb goes, is everything. And a new study suggests 36,000 Americans would be alive today had social distancing measures been enforced just 1 week earlier in March. And if the lockdown had begun on March the 1st, 83% of the nation's current deaths would have been avoided. That is the pretty heart-wrenching finding of research this week from Columbia University. And this is not just retrospective. These results show as all 50 states now move to reopen, outbreaks can easily get out of control unless officials closely monitor infections and immediately clamp down on new flare-ups. The lesson in that is that each day officials delay imposing restrictions in early March this year came at a great cost. And a reminder, it was on March 9 that the president was still arguing against shutdowns when he tweeted that last year 37,000 Americans died of flu and nothing is shut down. At that stage, of course, there had been just 22 coronavirus deaths. But he wasn't alone. New York Governor Andrew Cuomo and Mayor of New York City Bill de Blasio were still squabbling on March 18th over whether there should be a shelter-in-place order given. 2 days later, a stay-at-home order and a range of social distancing measures were imposed. Still, touring a Ford factory in Michigan earlier today, which has been making ventilators in recent weeks, and again, not wearing a face mask in front of the cameras despite a request from management and unions, the president said even if there is a second wave in the months ahead, there won't be a second shutdown. He said, we're not going to close the country. He said, we're going to put out the fires. And he foreshadowed an announcement that churches will reopen soon.
Literally, I just got off the phone with CDC and I talked about churches. I said, I want the churches to open, and the people want the churches to open, and I think you'll have something come down very soon from CDC. We want to get our churches back. Our country's coming back.
And Chaz, I'm old enough to remember when President Trump wanted to reopen the pews in time for Easter.
Yeah.
So we're back there again.
That's true, but you raised the real issue going forward, which is what if there is a second outbreak? Because I've gained the feeling, especially if this is close to the election, let's say it's August or September, Trump's not going to want to lock down again just before an election. And for that matter, the governors won't either, I expect.
Yeah. And the difference, of course, many would argue this time is they've got the personal protective equipment, they've got tens of thousands of ventilators that weren't ready. So there's a higher level of preparation that means we don't necessarily have to take these same massive suppression efforts if there is a recurrence of cases, but it really just comes down to what can they do as those spot fires re-emerge that the president talks about.
Absolutely. I should also say, when we're talking about back in March and saying how they should have started earlier, I remember when the first lockdown happened in California, and we were talking, we were talking about it and we were going, wow, like it was surprising. It's not like everyone was saying, oh, they should have locked down weeks ago back then. As the scientists always say, when it feels like the right time, it's too late. You need to get in early, which is a shame. On that study, though, I think that few people would be surprised to hear that when you lock down earlier, you protect more people. But the surprising thing was the dramatic difference, the magnitude of the difference just from 1 week. And I've got another study along those lines. This analysis of what happened in Europe, and it backs up that theory. This Oxford Uni analysis found that when a lockdown happened, or how a lockdown happened, was much more important than the severity of the lockdown. In fact, there was little correlation at all between the severity of a nation's restrictions and whether it managed to curb excess deaths, which is interesting as well. People think you need to smother the place, but it doesn't seem like you do. Although having said that, we should have some modesty with these studies, both the study you said and the study I said. Because if there's one thing we've learned during this crisis, it's models aren't very good. Viruses are hard to replicate, and especially if you look at the countries that have done the best, South Korea, Taiwan, Hong Kong, none of them had full lockdowns. They're all partial lockdowns, and Hong Kong had a direct line on high-speed rail to Wuhan. It's the densest place on Earth, has 7.5 million people, 4 deaths, right? And they use a completely different model of testing people and then isolating the people who are sick rather than locking down the whole place.
But one of the things, of course, we are all learning from the expert level to the layperson level is there are certain characteristics that are repeating themselves in terms of where are the most potentially dangerous, contagious environments. And one of them looks an awful lot like churches. Literally,
yes,
churches, in the case of not just the United States, but South Korea and elsewhere. Choir practices where people are singing, that is really, really bad. So when the president is now talking about, on the one hand, you've got a religious and sort of civil liberty issue around people being able to worship together, that's fine. But the risk, particularly when you've got a lot of older congregants as well, with places with no or not particularly great filtering of their air conditioning and so on, it is potentially a recipe for some very vulnerable people to be in the middle of some pretty significant outbreaks.
Well, what you need there are masks,
right?
Which leads me to the next study. Hong Kong scientists put 2 groups of hamsters in cages next to each other, one group with corona, one group without. And when neither cage had a mask, 2/3 of the healthy hamsters had COVID within a week. When they placed a mask over the infected cage, only 16% of healthy hamsters caught COVID. And when they only placed a mask over the healthy hamster's cage, about 33% of healthy hamsters caught COVID. So that shows not only do masks make a huge difference, but they seem to particularly stop you spreading the disease even more than catching it. Although, you might want to be careful about what kind of mask you've got. Yeah, I'm not sure the makers of this new product have totally thought their concept through, John.
That's almost as cute as the tiny hamster masks I was imagining in the earlier story. But this is, again, one of those evolving knowledge things because for a long time we had people, particularly in Asia, who had dealt with SARS and swine flu and MERS as well, who were immediately putting on masks. And we had health officials, partly through concern that people were stockpiling masks and they were not being made available for frontline medical personnel, were discouraging people from wearing masks. But it does seem that as we head towards the reopening in various countries around the world, that masks may well be a bigger part of that future, which again made it particularly disappointing that President Trump, after being asked by the president of Ford Motor Company and the union of auto workers, like literally he was on a stage where you had union workers, people who are working on the production line, making ventilators, not just Ford trucks, but ventilators for a potential future use. They're wearing the full plastic eye covering as well as the face mask. President Trump removed his mask after wearing one backstage, reportedly, when he was being shown a couple of old something or another's, old cars, and then in front of reporters, he didn't want to give reporters the satisfaction of seeing him in a mask because he has taken a stand against wearing a mask in public. And this is where the kind of the partisanship, the fighting between Trump and the media becomes ridiculous. It's dangerous for the president, even though he is taking hydroxychloroquine, but it's also just such a bad example for the American people who are now being told you should be wearing masks. But if you're a Trump follower, you're getting this message that says, well, he doesn't wear masks, maybe I shouldn't wear a mask. Although the Trump campaign is now selling Trump 2020 masks. So who knows how this is all going to play.
Yeah, it's not helpful. Although I will say the good news is that people don't necessarily follow his lead as closely as you might think. I know we think all Republicans follow Trump. CBS poll just this week, I just looked up just while you were talking then, 69% of people say they're wearing masks almost all the time or all the time at the moment. So that's a very high number, I would have thought, generally. So that is good news. That's across America.
Yep.
Now let's get into the numbers, shall we?
Sure.
Today I'm going to show you weekly numbers for broader trends. So there were 198,000 new cases 2 weeks ago. Last week there were 167,000 new cases. This week there are 162,000 new cases. Still going down, but hitting a bit of a plateau, unfortunately. And for deaths, 2 weeks ago, 13,000. Last week there were 10,000. This week there are 9,000 deaths. So also still falling, but hitting a bit of a plateau. On the positive side, we're talking about 500,000 tests a day being the bare minimum that experts recommend. America's now hitting 400,000 tests a day, so they're getting close to the minimum. And that percentage of tests that are positive is now only 6%. And I've said many times, anything under 10% is considered a good result. So that is progress. How about the states? Well, on Wednesday, I showed you that only 2 states had met the phase 1 federal requirements for opening up. Now that is 1 state, New Mexico. Oh well, good job, New Mexico. Some states, they're not doing such a good job though, like Georgia, who put out a graph last week to show how well their new cases are going. They're dropping through the floor, but look at the order of their dates. 1st of May, 30th of April, 4th of May, 6th of May, 5th of May, 2nd of May, 7th of May, 26th of April. It's like that graph was made by Marty McFly, John. And then this week they buggered up their numbers again. Once again, misleading people into thinking they were doing a lot better than they were. So the moral of the story, watch out for Georgia's numbers. Finally, we talk a lot about raw numbers, you and I, but the administration rightly points out America has a lot of people, a lot more than a lot of countries they're comparing against. So we should show you some per capita figures. These are all the large countries ranked by deaths per million people. Not a lot of surprises on that list. Spain, Italy, UK, Sweden. America is 9th in the world. And note, by the way, that's every large country who has more than 100 deaths per million people. In other words, every other country in the world that's not on that list has had a third of America's death rate or less. So just bear that in mind next time Trump talks about per capita.
Oh, I don't know about that, Chaz, when you say per capita, because there is a little bit of doubt about the whole notion of per capita. As the president says...
You know, when you say per capita, there's many per capitas. It's like per capita relative to what? But you can look at just about any category, and we're really at the top, meaning positive on a per capita basis, too. They've done a great job.
He's lost me.
Yeah, I think his teachers didn't do a great job when it comes to that. But look, for more on the latest developments in America's fight against coronavirus, including the announcement on Monday of this past week of a successful early trial of a vaccine by the Massachusetts-based biotech firm Moderna, we spoke to Dr. Tom Tsai from the Harvard Global Health Institute.
I think we're all hungry for some good news when it comes to vaccines, but the data are still coming in, and these early results from Moderna study come basically from 8 subjects where they were able to have neutralizing antibodies in response to the vaccines. So the data are encouraging, but still very early days yet, and I think too soon to rest on our laurels, and we still need to really rely on the tried and true public health interventions to combat COVID-19 until we have the vaccines out on the market.
Dr. Tsai, you know, though, that historically 4 or 5 years is fast for a vaccine to be developed. The objective of Operation Warp Speed from the Trump administration is the end of this year, barely 7 months away. Is that realistic?
Now, I think most of the realistic timeframes, which is still very fast for vaccine development, still is in the year to year and a half timeframe. So I think it's encouraging that the government is doubling down on its efforts to try to speed that up. But again, I think it's still too soon to tell if we'll be able to beat the current estimates. You know, most public health experts still agree that at the earliest, still a year to year and a half out from having a vaccine out to the market.
Are we focusing too much on vaccines at the moment rather than treatments?
So I think right now we really have to rely on the non-pharmacologic and non-pharmaceutical interventions, which is really around good public health practice, wearing universal masks, good hand hygiene, physical distancing. You know, that's really the mainstay right now. Eventually, we'll get to the point of having the vaccines to help prevent the further spread of the COVID-19 pandemic. Treatments do play a role, but they're really focused on the most symptomatic individuals, and the early data from some of the therapies out there suggest that they can decrease the duration of symptoms for some of the sicker patients who are in the hospital. But, you know, too soon to have, I think, our hopes pinned on a treatment right now.
What are some of the lessons specifically when it comes to the areas that took the hardest hit first time? We've talked a lot about New York and potentially the role of not just population density, but the density of the subway system potentially being a vector there. No, it seems no number of masks is going to protect people if they're in a crowded subway carriage.
That's right. So I think the masks, the hand hygiene, the physical distancing, that's all part of the tools we have, but we still really need to rely on testing, because no amount of masks is going to be helpful if you're flying blind in terms of your public policy and public health response. So it's about all the pieces falling into place and all those pieces of the puzzle coming together. And really the main focus still remains testing, testing, testing. And in fact, the need for testing only increases as we reopen, because now we're moving away from diagnosing COVID-19 patients in the hospital to a public-wide strategy around surveillance and contact tracing. So the need for tests is actually going to increase, and that's actually really what's going to be driving our ability to get our arms around the pandemic and truly control it.
This is, as they say, a novel coronavirus. It's new. So what have we learned so far about the virus itself that you think is the most important thing?
I think the most important thing we've learned, and in some ways the most challenging and puzzling piece of it, is how varied the response is on an individual basis. We see, patients in the hospital on ventilators in the ICU and a very high fatality rate. But we also see individuals who are completely asymptomatic. And we know that about 25 to 50% of patients may be asymptomatic. So that poses a challenge, not just in terms of how to guide our public health response, but for the public to stay vigilant, because it's so variable in how the disease presents itself. And that makes it an extremely challenging pandemic to really focus our efforts on.
What are the other significant lessons, or at least the mysteries that have been revealed about who's been getting COVID-19? Obviously older, more vulnerable, health compromised individuals, but also racial minority groups have been disproportionately hard hit by this?
Yeah, John, that's an excellent point. I wouldn't think of it as a mystery. What epidemics do is really lay bare the underlying, moral and social fabric of a nation. And what the COVID-19 pandemic has really laid bare is the underlying inequities in the U.S. healthcare system. The U.S. healthcare system has been described as, islands of excellence in a sea of mediocrity. And we've seen that, play out in lots of scenarios. Patients are getting very excellent care in the ICUs, yet we're letting, older Americans in nursing homes, prisoners in prisons, workers in meatpacking plants, all become very severely infected by COVID-19. We have, varying degrees of bottlenecks in masks and respirators in hospitals versus, smaller rural clinics. So, that's the real challenge, is how do we take a large country like America with 50 states, thousands of counties, and tailor a national response, a national strategy to that to meet the needs of very urban and very rural populations. No easy answers there, but I think that's, an important lesson that we've learned and the challenge that lies ahead.
Doctor, you mentioned contact tracing. When you look at the countries that have been most successful dealing with the coronavirus, contact tracing is very important, and isolating the people who are sick, as opposed to a lot of other countries which have done lockdowns and isolated everyone. Should America have pursued the Hong Kong, Taiwan type model where it was lots of testing and isolating sick people, rather than, in hindsight, what they did?
Absolutely, Chaz. I mean, we were on the sidelines watching The Diamond Princess as if it were a drama unfolding on other shores, but we missed the opportunity to prepare our own country in terms of ramping up the production of tests, ramping up the production and capacity for generating protective equipment. And we missed the ability to do that wide-scale surveillance and contact tracing. And like I was saying earlier, we were basically letting the supply chain drive our strategy instead of having the best strategy and ramping up our supply chain to meet that. So I think that's a tragedy from the last several months in the response in the U.S. and that lack of a coordinated national strategy. So we're in sort of the second half. It's halftime. It was a tough first half where we played a lot of defense. As we look towards the second half, we really need to focus on the offense, so being proactive and not just reactive. And that proactive response is learning from what other countries have done well, and that's a wide surveillance strategy that's really predicated on contact tracing, but more importantly, testing those contacts to make sure that snowball effect of tracing contacts and making sure we can safely and in a supported way isolate those individuals, so a single case doesn't become an entire cluster.
There has been a lot of interest from the White House, the President in particular, about the either preventative or curative effects of chloroquine as a therapy. He revealed this week, of course, that he's taking it himself. Given that a lot of, it seems, frontline medical staff are also taking chloroquine just in case it works, is it appropriate that the President be taking it himself?
I don't think it's appropriate. I mean, most of the best guidelines now don't suggest to take the hydroxychloroquine medication prophylactically, and the data is still very mixed on whether it really has a true role to play. So, I think most physicians in the U.S. would not prescribe that to their patients. And there was an uptick in prescriptions for that medication early on, but I think that was largely driven by fear and not sort of rational judgment. And, and that's especially why we need good data, good evidence to guide our prescribing, to guide our medical decision making, but just as importantly, our policy making. And I think that's where our leaders need to set the example on really following the best evidence and not relying on hunches or instinct.
Tom Sy, so good to have you with us. Thanks for your time.
Pleasure to join you guys.
Hello, this is Norman Swan, the most trusted and beloved doctor in Australia, which of course is complete bullshit, but that's what they told me to say. The possible side effects of hydroxychloroquine include hair loss, irritability.
Let's see if it works. It might and it might not. I happen to feel good about it, but who knows? I've been right a lot.
Dizziness, diarrhea.
What kind of crap is that?
Vomiting.
They get sick, they go and throw up all over. It's too much.
Itching, and mood changes.
I did, and you didn't respond, and now I'm calling on
Sorry, I just
the young lady in the back, please.
I just wanted to let my colleague finish, but can I ask you
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much. Appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Oh, and by the way, Chaz, we should note that after announcing earlier in the week that he is taking hydroxychloroquine for a couple of weeks now, yesterday, President Trump, he is about to stop taking it.
I think the regimen finishes in a day or two. Yeah, I think it's 2 days.
But that too struck some experts as a little bit weird because he said he was taking it as a preventative.
It's a precaution.
Prophylactic, if you will, even though it is entirely unproven as a prophylactic. But why stop now? Is it because there haven't been any more cases in the White House, which there were a couple of weeks ago, which was about the time when he started taking it? Who knows? Maybe.
It doesn't make much sense. Unfortunately, though, the damage has already been done. When I say that, I mean the issue of hydroxychloroquine has already been hopelessly politicised. Even overseas. In Brazil, the health minister just resigned because Bolsonaro demanded the early use of hydroxychloroquine for patients. Sounds familiar? And over in Russia, Putin's doing it as well. He's into hydroxychloroquine. It seems like the popular strongman union got a group deal or something on hydroxychloroquine. They're all getting into it together. But it's gotten so political that this is how Trump reacted during the week to an unsuccessful hydroxychloroquine trial.
They were giving it to people that were in very bad shape. They were very old, almost dead. It was a Trump enemy statement.
A Trump enemy
Those
statement.
people died just to spite him. They're probably Democrats, Chad.
It's a trial. This is not a man who is interested in finding out the truth. I'll tell you that. Mind you, Trump's opponents don't seem too interested in reality either. Hydroxychloroquine can potentially provoke an adverse reaction, as we just saw from Dr. Norman Swan, from those with a heart condition in particular. That's the concern, okay? And they turn that into this.
He's not taking something that his own administration has said will kill you, that his own FDA said will kill you, that the VA said will kill you.
All of a sudden, it's like a serial killer. No, it's not going to kill you. If you have a heart condition, you might have an adverse reaction. Otherwise, you're okay. Like it's just. But the problem with that is that we still don't know if this drug works or not. Yeah. Like people just assuming, depending on their political side, it works or it doesn't. But all the trials so far have been flawed in some way. We need some better research. And the problem is the debate over the drug is scaring away trial participants.
Right.
It makes it harder to do the research we need. People say, well, that's the drug that's dangerous for your heart. Or I saw on TV that it was dangerous. And it's not dangerous except for a small number of people. Yep. So that is annoying. Thankfully, though, there is one gold standard 3,000 person double-blinded placebo-controlled trial that is going forward, fingers crossed, and that reports back in June. So hopefully next month we will find out once and for all, does this bloody thing work or not?
Yes. If we can put a little bit more faith in science and actual research.
Trump enemy statements.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, and it is kind of symptomatic of so many of the debates right now around this, particularly in the United States, but also elsewhere, whether it's the all or nothing approach. It's we have to either stay sheltered in place until there's a vaccine, or we have to open everything up and ride it like a cowboy. It's like there is a sensible middle ground that we can actually all kind of agree on and then make personal choices around what risks we take or don't take, as to the extent to which people can make those choices when they've also got to go out and keep their job.
You're a dreamer.
Yeah, I know. Look, there was another pretty dire opinion poll this week for President Trump. This time it came from Quinnipiac. The top line was bad enough. Joe Biden leading by 50 points to 39 amongst registered voters. That was Biden up 1 and Trump down 2 from the last Q poll of about 6 weeks ago. And if that was replicated in November, that'd be a landslide to Biden. The crosstabs in this, though, were probably even more worrying for President Trump, who now trails Biden on who would be better at handling the economy. That was previously Donald Trump's strong suit, the only area where he was getting consistently sort of high 50s, low 60s approval. When it comes to who cares about average Americans, again, Joe Biden doing much better. He gets 61%, only 42% say that Donald Trump cares. A 19-point gap at a time when Americans may very well be looking for empathy from their leader. And Joe Biden leads by 16 when asked who would do a better job at handling the coronavirus pandemic. And given that in some form or another, the pandemic is still going to be an issue in November because chances are there will not be a vaccine for at least another 6 to 12 months beyond that date, the pandemic and the economic implications are going to be a future issue, not a past referendum as well, going into 2021. That is a poll of registered voters, and not all registered voters, of course, vote with non-compulsory voting in the United States. 5.5 months out from the election, it's really difficult to try and predict who is a likely voter. And with this pandemic, of course, who knows who is actually going to vote? Older white voters, for instance, who are usually very reliable, they may be scared to go out and vote in person. Maybe they'll get absentee ballots. There's a whole debate about mail-in voting right now. Younger voters, though, from multi-ethnic backgrounds, they may feel as though actually they're less vulnerable in all of this. People under 30 seem to do pretty well. So maybe they're going to vote in greater numbers as they did for Obama in 2008 and 2012. But maybe not. Trump, of course, won seniors by 7 points in 2016, a key group. He won independents by 4 in this poll, Chaz, and in others that have come out as well this week from Fox News and others. President Trump is now trailing Joe Biden in those key demographic groups for him by double digits as well. So this is not just one poll showing Joe Biden doing well in a top-line national result, and it's not a national election, we know that. The popular vote doesn't determine it to the Electoral College. But all of these subgroups are looking really bad right now.
Yeah, and you make a great point about likely voters. Because normally you would say the likely voter bias is towards Republicans, usually, and that's usually because they're old.
Yep, and they voted in the midterms, and they voted last time, and they voted in their council elections and their state elections.
But as you say, when you look at those crosstabs, maybe the old people aren't favouring the Republicans this year.
Yeah.
So that there's a real question mark about that. Another poll, actually, on this, which I don't want to be going bad news for Trump all the time, but this is also bad news for Trump, is the issue he's been pumping for the last month, he's been really investing some time in, is China. Right, that's been his circuit breaker for Corona. Even if you don't think he's done a great job on Corona, it's China's fault. China. I'm going to crack down on China. I put up the border wall against China, etc. Right, the virtual border wall. Now, Morning Consult surveyed people about China, and do they see it as an enemy or as an ally? Bearing in mind, Trump has spent the last month trying to pump up this China is the enemy kind of vibe. 31% said China was the enemy, 23% said China was an ally. So that's far from an overwhelming majority for given how much effort he's put. And given the Republicans, you'd think would be overwhelmingly supporting that, but there's only 47% of Republicans said enemy.
I suspect
so even they're not buying it.
Those numbers are going to change though, because right now, at least the current sort of attack du jour from the Trump campaign against Joe Biden is that it's Beijing Joe, that he's always been too soft on China. And of course, with China now becoming increasingly assertive internationally and maybe changing the way in which security forces operate in Hong Kong, which is going to be seen as kind of a rollback of the special status of Hong Kong now as well, it seems as though this could be a ripe environment for a whole lot of blaming of Beijing.
You would think so, but I'll just throw one more bit of this poll to you. Who would you prefer to handle relations with China? Biden is leading Trump 40 to 38.
Yeah.
So now, maybe that's just the starting point. Maybe that will change rapidly, as you say. But just throwing it out there. At least so far, the China issue is not working as Trump would hope.
Yeah, and foreign policy should be Joe Biden's strong suit, whether it's his years as head of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, 2 terms as Vice President of the United States, where he had carriage of some major foreign policy areas. He was almost like a second Secretary of State for Barack Obama. So Joe Biden should be doing well on that front, but we'll see how that pans out as well. Now, things aren't looking terrific for President Trump right now, but still 5 and a bit months out from the election, who knows? And the good news for him is that his campaign have decided, well, they're going to start making their own news and indeed even their own chat shows. You've heard of The View with Whoopi and Joy and everybody?
Yes.
May I present to you The Right View.
Wednesday just got better because the ladies are live discussing the hottest topics of the week with you tonight.
And we will make America great again.
And that is already 5,000 times slicker than One American News Network.
Yeah, and the great thing about that show is literally half of the panellists are Trumps. So they're married to a Trump, their in-laws, etc., which again sort of says that it's still a family business. The Trump campaign is full of Trump.
Not a lot of Trump enemy statements there, I suspect.
No, that's right. Well, the reason that Trump is increasingly using his own video output is that he's rather unhappy with the criticism that he's been getting from, admittedly, some fairly small pockets on Fox News, like when Neil Cavuto this week warned his viewers that hydroxychloroquine is quite dangerous.
It will kill you. I cannot stress enough. This will kill you.
Now he's part of the "will kill you" brigade.
Yeah, oh no, he did actually specify. That was for brevity. He did actually specify. If you're in one of these high-risk groups, and you take it without supervision, it will kill you.
Excellent.
It will kill you, etc. And that's part of the concern.
Yeah.
Is that people taking it, off-label, etc., self-administering, without being constantly monitored, etc., etc. But yeah. Anyway, the president immediately indicated after seeing that clip of Neil Cavuto, he was looking for a new media best friend.
Fox News is no longer the same, looking for a new outlet.
And then today, he gave up on any pretense at all about what he expects from Fox. He wants a lapdog.
Fox News is doing nothing to help Republicans and me get reelected on November 3rd.
And then on Twitter, he went on to list Cavuto and pretty much everybody, Juan Williams, everybody he hates on Fox News. So this is kind of interesting. I don't really think this is the end of a beautiful romance between Trump and Fox. He is using, as you suggest, the One American News Network to kind of be a cudgel to beat up Fox. But it still has the highest ratings of any cable network. He just wants them to get in line and get behind him.
He needs them as much as they need him.
But that for the president to actually say in as many words, Fox is not doing enough to get me and Republicans elected in November. I mean, we know that's what he thinks. But that he said that still surprised me a little this morning.
To be honest, that's not very bright, because if you're a Fox News host, you don't want to be seen as a lapdog. When he says that kind of stuff, that makes people like Chris Wallace, I'm sure, it makes the hair on the back of their neck bristle up, and it makes them go harder, I'm sure.
Yeah. Well, we'll see what impact it has, if anything. This week's sacking of the State Department Inspector General Steve Linick wouldn't usually be big news, Steve who, but to some, this is starting to look like a bit of a purge going on. Inspectors General audit and investigate government departments. They look for waste and fraud and mismanagement. And in the past few weeks, Michael Atkinson, the intelligence IG, has been sacked. The acting defence IG, Glenn Fine, was demoted. Acting Health and Human Services IG, Christy Grimm, was replaced. And now Steve Linnick has become the latest of the watchdogs to be shown the door. All had done something that had raised the ire of the president. In the case of Linnick, he was investigating the Trump administration's use of an emergency declaration to sell weapons to Saudi Arabia last year. That circumvented a congressional ban because the weapons could have been used in the war in Yemen. And then there were also claims that Secretary of State Mike Pompeo had been misusing department resources, having staff perform domestic errands and chores like picking up his dry cleaning, walking the family dog, making restaurant reservations, packing up his mother-in-law's house and helping her move to a nursing home. Pompeo is also accused of hosting dinners with potential political donors on the government purse at the State Department, mixing government business and electoral business. Pompeo is, of course, a former member of the House of Representatives. He's a Tea Partier. He's being pushed to run for Senate from Kansas this year, but he has also apparently got his eye on the Republican presidential nomination in 2024. Oh. So Pompeo doing all this spade work, building up his donor networks. He's already close with the Koch operation. So this is all kind of interesting. Linnick was sacked, Pompeo says, because he was undermining the State Department. And it was Pompeo who recommended that Linnick be sacked. The president actually did it. But when Pompeo was asked about it this week, Chaz, he said, yeah, I sacked the guy, but he wouldn't actually say why. Take a look.
I have no sense of what investigations were taking place inside the Inspector General's office. Couldn't possibly have retaliated for all the things. I've seen the various stories that like, someone was walking my dog to sell arms to my dry cleaner. I mean, it's all just crazy. It's all crazy stuff.
So Pompeo says, look, he didn't know what Linnick was investigating anyway, all these ideas that he's been doing, it's all crazy, although he hasn't actually denied those allegations that he used staff for personal errands. You could justify some of that. You could say, he's Secretary of State of the United States. If he's working, he's on the phone to Putin or something, he hasn't got time to go and walk the dog, and dogs have to be taken out. It's kind of a call of nature thing. If you need to pick up your suit that's at the dry cleaner, etc., should the Secretary of State of the United States be going down to the corner to pick up his suit when, again, the phone's ringing?
I don't believe he sacked someone for investigating him for walking the dog.
Yeah, but I guess this is the kind of the inference here, and I guess the reason why Democrats are pushing this narrative is that they want it to look as though Mike Pompeo, like a lot of people in Trump's circuit, sees no clear delineation between what is personal and what is public when it comes to money and resources and everything else. If Pompeo's got Mrs. Pompeo travelling around the Middle East with him, which he was also doing as well, they made a big deal about that. But the main thing that he said Linnick is doing is he's been leaking to the media. He's been talking to people. Yeah. And so this is kind of the big rub on Linnick. Now, ultimately, where this leads in terms of Pompeo's career, but also the kind of the people that are now keeping an eye on Trump's administrations, there is something that is looking a little fishy to some here. What do you think?
Look, the bottom line is we don't know if this is dodgy or not. There's just no information out there. The problem for me, like I said the last time we talked about Inspector Generals, it's sacking 5 Inspector Generals a month. There's 5, by the way, because the Transportation Acting Inspector General was also sacked. Everyone forgets him because who cares? It's transportation. Yeah. But he was also sacked. 5 in a month. Yeah. And you just go, okay, well, that is becoming a bit of a pattern. If you cross Trump or someone from his administration, you get sacked. And that's a concern. Like Mitt Romney put it this way. He said the firings of multiple inspectors general was unprecedented. Doing so without good cause chills the independence essential to their purpose. It's a threat to accountable democracy and a fissure in the constitutional balance of power. And Trump countered that reasonable argument with loser! And he tweeted out a video of Romney losing the 2012 election, which is an extremely clever response if you are 8 years old. Even more worrying, Trump is now making noises about cracking down on whistleblowers as well. He stated, this whole whistleblower racket needs to be looked at very closely. it's causing great injustice and harm. Now, I don't want to overplay this, okay? Because Reagan and Bush 1, both tried to sack lots of inspector generals, but they did it at the beginning of their administrations, not in retaliation for anything, right? So it's a little bit different. The thing that makes me concerned is, even the Supreme Court last week, Trump is out there, his representatives are arguing that he cannot be investigated, that he doesn't need to provide information to the House of Representatives. Yep. He's cracking down on all forms of accountability, and this is becoming a greater and greater problem in my view.
And it's going to be a big mess for whoever comes next, whether it's in January next year or in January of 2025, to put a lot of those checks and balances and various watchdogs and ethical structures back around the government to make sure there is accountability, whether, as you say, there's anything going wrong or not. Now, we're just about out of time. You've got a Obamagate update for us.
Very, very quickly. I'll do more of this in the podcast because we're way out of time. But just, I have to follow up from last week. We talked about the unmasking. That was when Michael Flynn spoke to Kislyak, the Russian ambassador. Flynn's name was supposed to be redacted, but they found it out. It was on the 29th of December he made that particular phone call.
So everybody wanted to know who was it that unmasked Flynn's name.
Yes, and then the Director of Intelligence, Richard Grenell, released a list of a whole bunch of potential unmaskers, people who had requested Flynn's name at someone's name at one point in time that turned out to be Flynn because it was masked at the time. They didn't know it was Flynn when they asked for it, okay? Turns out, number one, it was 29th of December they made that call, right? It was on the 5th of January they had the meeting about that call, where they talked about that call. So he was then unmasked. Between the 29th of December and the 5th of January, literally no one made an unmasking request that turned out to be Michael Flynn, which means the entire list we got given last week, none of them did it, okay? And then they would have known that when they released that list as well. That's not something which I discovered and they didn't know. Yeah. They knew that. Secondly, even more importantly, you go, well, how'd they find out Flynn's name? Turns out it came from the FBI, and what we found out this week in the FBI report about the Flynn-Kislyak call, Flynn's name was never actually redacted.
There was no mask.
No, there was no mask in the first place
to
for the FBI. So that whole, and they would have known that. So that whole releasing a list of people where they got out Biden's name and they said, oh, look at that, all garbage, all of it. So why did they do that? Well, I think we know why. So Trump could say this.
And I watched Biden yesterday on Good Morning America being interviewed by one of your colleagues, George Stephanopoulos, and he said he knew nothing about anything. He has no idea. He knows nothing about anything. Nothing at all. And then it gets released today that he was a big unmasker. So how do you know nothing if you're one of the unmaskers?
And by the way, even Bill Barr's saying that he is not likely to follow up on Obama or Biden for charges. So this Obamagate thing is going nowhere. I'll talk more about it on the podcast.
Is it going nowhere though? We'll see.
It'll keep on bubbling.
Yeah, okay, that's it for another week. We'll see you for another trip to Planet America Wednesday night, 9:30 on ABC TV.
And you'll find longer interviews and more online. And don't forget the PEP podcast. I'll be talking Obamagate with Dr. David Smith and me. See you there.
Good night, mate.